Weeds Find a Way. Words by Cindy Jensen Elliott. Weeds find a way to live where other plants can't grow.
I love story time.
Weeds find a way to stay reaching deep with a grip so strong the stem always breaks first, leaving the living roots behind to sprout again.
There are so many good books about gardening.
Weeds find a way to be loved, sending up flares of righteous
Each with
red,
hidden messages
flags
about
of
life.
bloom. Weeds find a way to stay unexpected guests who just happen to bring the whole family along.
That just make me a little hopeful for the future.
The end.
Plus, the pictures are nice. Hi, this is Gritty and Green, and I'm your host, Meredith Nutting. This week, we're getting into the weeds about, well, weeds. I got a chance to talk with the champion of our least celebrated plants, Lady Danny. So let's get growing. You can't be engaged in any online gardening group without seeing at least one, if not 1,000 posts asking, "Is this a weed?" It usually goes along with a picture of a small, innocuous plant living its best life, with some story about the gardener forgetting what they planted or wondering what volunteer plant has popped up in their herb garden. The question is always, is this a weed? And that question is, no offense, useless. And it can dig up some troubling truths about gardening. Like, what belongs in a garden that's on land that shouldn't belong to anybody? Is a weed in the eye of the beholder? Am I a weed? First, let's start with the most basic question. What is a weed? By definition, a weed is a plant growing where you don't want it to be growing. That's it. Depending on what the plant is, it may outcompete the plants you are trying to cultivate when it comes to nutrients, water, and light. And it might attract pests or spread diseases. Or maybe it adds nutrients to the soil and attracts pests away from your plants. There's a good reason to know what is growing alongside the plants you've purposefully put in the ground and are caring for. But asking, is this a weed, is not going to get you that information. What is this plant? Is a better question. By starting there, you can find out if it is beneficial or harmful to the plants it is growing nearby. You can find out if it's a native or an introduced species. You can find out if it's aggressive or invasive. Introduced, aggressive, and invasive are descriptors that are commonly used interchangeably, but they have some important differences. An introduced species is one that didn't evolve in the place it's growing. It was brought there, oftentimes on purpose, and if you're seeing it in your garden, it probably had a great time living in a land with nothing to eat it or keep it in check. Not all introduced species thrive or even survive in their new home, but if they do, they tend to become aggressive. Aggressive plants are those that can outcompete other species. Lots of introduced species with no natural competition can become aggressive. But there are native aggressive species too. Usually these are pioneer species, like goldenrod, that take advantage of open land on the edges of forests, kind of like most of our cleared farmlands and parks and gardens. And then there are invasive plants. They are introduced species that are aggressive and economically or environmentally harmful. My sense from seeing thousands of posts asking, "Is this a weed?" is that this is the question folks are really asking. Do I need to remove this plant before it takes over my entire garden forever? Some introduced species are neither invasive nor aggressive, and some native species can be aggressive, especially in our little gardens. So any plant can be a weed if you don't want it there. But then there's a list of what are deemed noxious weeds. Those can be native or introduced species. They are plants that are really aggressive, difficult to manage, toxic, or carry diseases. If a plant is on the noxious weed list, it will be banned from being sold or transported in the state, and folks who have it will be encouraged to remove it. In Pennsylvania, for example, the Callery or Bradford pear tree, which was introduced in the early 1900s from Asia, is now on the noxious weeds list. You probably have seen these trees and smelled their white flowers, which increasingly have been described as having a distinct, unpleasant smell of a certain bodily fluid. They are one of the most common urban trees in the southeastern United States. Originally, they were touted as being sterile trees unable to reproduce, but cultivars were created and then the tree started reproducing. To quote one of my favorite movies, Jurassic Park, nature finds a way. And now the Bradford pear has taken over wild landscapes, outcompeting native plants and harming those ecosystems. Starting this year, the trees will no longer be available. However, the damage has been done, and as long as there are trees out there to reproduce, it won't stop. Invasive plants aren't the only species on the noxious weed list, though. Native plants can be deemed noxious in areas, particularly if they are toxic to livestock or clog up waterways, affecting the ability to manage them. So knowing what a plant is extremely helpful, and knowing what questions to ask will help get you to those answers. What is this plant? Is it native? Is it beneficial to what I'm growing? Or is it harmful? Is it aggressive or invasive? Is it illegal? Any of those questions is better than just asking, is this a weed? But there's a couple questions I left out of my list. Is it edible? Is it medicinal? What was it doing before my garden was here? Who was using it? I got to chat with someone who asks all of these questions every day. South Philly forager and self-described lover of plants, formerly known as weeds, Lady Danny.
I was seriously not the outdoorsy type whatsoever. I was a Girl Scout. I got 2 badges. One was for archery, the other was from arts and crafts. That was it. I was not a fan of sleeping outdoors or camping or any of those things. Mosquitoes think that I'm a movable feast. So this was not an easy thing, but I just felt like so led to do it that, sometimes you just get pulled into something and it's like beyond your control. And that's kind of what I felt with this.
Danny Morinich is a master herbalist and member of the American Herbalist Guild and American Botanical Council. She also hosts foraging tours with Wild Foodies, the Free Library of Philadelphia, and the Painted Bride Resistance Garden, among others. But as you've heard, getting to be one of Philadelphia's most well-known foragers wasn't a straight path.
I think officially started foraging in like 2016, but the path was set because after 20 years of selling recruitment and advertising in medical marketing and media, the company I was with was changing dramatically. So exactly 2 weeks before my 20th anniversary, I quit. I gave them, the 2 weeks notice, but I was done. And during that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was doing soap making at the time and doing a lot of stuff with essential oils. So I started on a path with training for that. And then I realized the waste that is, because it takes so much botanical material in order to distill that down to essential oil.
Essential oils are created by separating the aromatic oil compounds from the rest of the plant. It's basically a distilling process, with the end product being a concentrated plant extract that can be used in soap, lotion, or as aromatherapy. But getting enough oil requires a lot of plant material. Most plants are made up of only 1 to 2% of these oils. So it can take 8 million jasmine blossoms to make 2 pounds of essential oil. It can take 60 rosebuds to produce 1 drop of rose oil. So while you may only need a drop or 2 of an essential oil at a time, the amount of plant material wasted in making it is astonishing.
So then I started getting more into using herbs as a full spectrum thing. So I did an online master herbalism course with that. But then when I was talking with other herbalists, they were all kind of in their ivory tower and dealing with kind kind of potageries and, planted, cultivated plants. And that was kind of not where I wanted to be. I always thought, what if something happened? What if there was some kind of, I was thinking more of an ecological disaster where all of your cultivated plants don't grow. So what happens? You're stuck with weeds. I don't call them weeds. I prefer, a la Prince, plants formerly known as weeds, because it's really about, once you know what it's capable of, it is a mindset change. And the things that you're stepping on every day, the things that you're ignoring. I've always been for underdogs. Maybe that's why Philly is my city, is because it's really about the things that people ignore and step on and say, oh, well, that's nothing, or rip it out. So many plants that we just disregard, whether they're native or not, have value. And I certainly, if I'm not going to devalue a plant and call it a weed like everybody else, then I certainly can't devalue stuff and say, oh, well, you weren't born here, so see ya.
With a focus on weeds, Dani's company grew and evolved, and Dani herself received a title.
Friends of mine in Scotland, they knew that I was trying to set up a soap business, and they bought my husband and I the official 1 square foot of earth in Scotland. And because you now have the rights to that, you also have the right to be laird or lady, and that's what I chose to use. I really have a problem with people that are like hoity-toity with titles, and I thought, hey, if you can have one, so can I, damn it.
And then came another twist in Lady Dani's path as an herbalist. In 2016, her dad died. Growing up, he was a gardener and a small game hunter, so spent a lot of time out in nature.
So when he passed, I went out with the idea of just kind of reconnecting to all the things that my father loved. And that's when I went out with Wild Foodies.
Wild Foodies is a Philadelphia-based group founded by Lynn Landis in 2010 that aims to empower people through the education of wild edible plants.
And then once I went out with them, I just kept going out with them, because it was like I wanted more information. What do these weeds do? And with Wild Foodies and Lynn Landis, it was all about the food section of that, which gave me a really good basis for that. Then I fell down a rabbit hole of wanting to know, okay, well, beyond eating this, are there medicinal? Because there were a lot of plants that Wild Foodies were like, oh, that's not edible. So they were just kind of disregarding. And again, me with the ignored and, the dismissed, I started really looking at, other things. And is it not edible because you don't know how to eat it? Is it not edible because maybe you don't have information about it? Is there folk information about it? Which led me down to another path of looking through Lenape writings and people who lived in the area and how they've used the plants over periods of time. And it just started pulling up a wellspring of information, and I just started writing all of it down. So much of it, I'm constantly finding out new and exciting information about plants that I never knew. And Lynn just said, really you should be doing your own tours.
So around 2018, Lady Dani did start hosting her own tours with Wild Foodies. Her main track was through the meadows in FDR Park in South Philly.
It was nothing short of magical. I mean, it was so dense. It was seriously forest primeval. You would go in there and the trees even on the sides were so dense that you couldn't see the housing and Packer Park and things that were around it. When you went deep into it, especially if you were by yourself, as many mornings I was, it was just beautiful. I mean, just thick and lush and green, and some pathways were overgrown, but then you would look forward to some areas you get to and blackberries are in abundance, or back when they used to have at the Girard Point Lookout, there was a tree that had 2 swings there, and you could look down this kind of rolling lawn that was just green and lush, and people would love to take their dogs off leash and just let them run down there. It was absolutely beautiful. And now when you go and you stand in that same spot and you look down and it's just all brown field, it's heartbreaking.
Despite public outcry, over 400 trees were cut down, including 45 massive heritage trees. If you're confused why a city in desperate need for canopy cover, especially in South Philly, would just chop down a forest, you aren't alone.
And now that they've cut off almost all of the trails that I used to take in when I took tours in are now closed off. It's such a tremendous, for me personally, a tremendous loss because of just resources of things that I could barge back there. But then in the last year, even before they did the final destruction of all the heritage trees, it was just sad to see them to start ripping more things out, to start spraying things that they felt were, persona non grata anymore. It was just, it's really sad because at its heyday, it was so amazing. It was like something that you would see in a storybook, and, overgrown like brambles and things that looked like little thatched huts. It was just, it was everything. The ability to be in green space has been proven by several studies that it lowers stress levels. It has a way of making you feel better about yourself and your situation, and it reduces anger and all of those positive things that just being in a space with trees can promote. You have a city that has a clean and green initiative, that should be something that you're promoting, and instead we're cutting it down. We're cutting it down. We're removing shade, removing something that automatically turns carbon dioxide into oxygen. And then we're expecting people to not only be okay with that, but as the temperatures increase, you shouldn't be upset about that because, after all, it is what it is. And we need to really reconnect and realize that everything, as my dad used to say, is all stitched. There's such an interweb. It's like roots in a tree. They don't just attach to that tree. They go through the land. They reach out to other things. There are pulses and things that happen. And it's you can't divorce it. It's so connected. I'm sorry, that was a rant.
If you take away one thing about gardening and green spaces from this podcast, I hope it's the running theme that nature in cities is a necessity to our health and well-being. And this urban forest had the added bonus for some like Lady Danny as a place to forage. But it's not the only place.
I am an urban forager. I live in the city, so I'm dealing with what I got at the time. A lot of people get tied up into it needs to be so many feet away from the street. It needs to be on a hill where water is running down and, all these other things. Now, I'm not going to pick up, I don't care how great the specimen looks, if there are needles around it or cigarette butts or things like that. No, I'll give that one a miss. But I am not above, in the city, there are constantly blocks of pavement that are missing that a lot of things will grow into. So maybe I won't use the root from that. But if dock is growing there and the seed stalk comes up, I know it's a member of the buckwheat family and those seeds can be ground and yield a buckwheat flour. So I'm damn sure going to take those. The other issue I hear a lot about is toxins in the ground. Depending on, in some areas where houses were pulled down, you might find a lot of weeds, but you kind of have to be cautious because you're not really sure if lead paint was used, if that's going into the ground. But, you take your chances. There is no way of knowing that great looking apple that you just bought from Whole Foods has not been, sprayed with pesticides. I know a lot of these companies say, oh no, we're all organic. Okay, I call shenanigans on that one because I've seen a lot of stuff that really isn't. Like organic honey cracks me up. How do the bees come back and say, we've only been to these flowers at the organic farm? I mean, yeah, you hope that the organic farm is nearby, they're not going to fly miles and miles, that they've got it right next door. But there's really not that way of knowing. So I just think some of it is, it's merchandising, it's marketing, and we fall for it. And we need to stop falling for that and looking to ourselves and what we can make, what we can grow, what we can use, and feel safer about that. And you just try and do your best. Nothing is promised to you. And realistically, we are drinking microplastics and eating a whole heap of chemicals on a daily. So don't get all precious with me about weeds that are coming out of the street.
One way Lady Danny has found to ensure the plants formerly known as weeds are safe to use the way she wants to is to grow them herself.
Living in South Philly, I too have a cemented in backyard. So one of the first things that we did was try and do some sort of container gardening. And that ran the gamut from just pots to, we kept finding, I guess it was like in the early 2000s, everybody must have been getting rid of their toilet. So we found the cisterns on the back. So we had them all lined up. And because they had a decent depth, it was easy for things like morning glories to go up and trellis up. And we've just, over the years, have found other ways to work around it. But one of the easier things for me was when I started doing foraging, finding so many things that were edible and medicinal that would grow in my flower pots or in my window boxes and things like that, and be able to use them. It's just so much easier with parks doing more reckless spraying with pesticides. The fact that I have this weed now growing where I can have control of it, I know that my soil is safe, is a big win. So I just seeded dandelions the other day, and people think I'm mad as a box of frogs, and you can think that, but I want to do the whole roasting of all the roots and eating them like French fries next year. And in order to do that, I have to be able to dig up those roots, which the park system definitely frowns upon. And I also want to make sure that the dirt that they're coming from isn't filled with like pesticides. And because even though the Hobbs Law passed in Philadelphia, which is a healthy outdoor protected spaces law and is supposed to prevent glyphosates from being used, it still happens.
The Healthy Outdoor Protected Spaces Law was written in 2020, and although it was officially enacted into law in January of 2021, the city is not enforcing it. In fact, according to the Department of Parks and Recreation, over 15 tons of toxic herbicides were sprayed on public lands in 2023 alone.
It's self-defense. It's growing weeds or allowing them to grow as a matter of self-defense, because I know the value of them and how they can be used in a beneficial way. And I really just wish people, I'm not saying that you're not going to weed them out, but I just wish people took a minute to understand some of these things and understand some weeds are incredibly beneficial to even things that you like. If we talk about lamb's quarter, lamb's quarter has more iron and everything than spinach, and people should be eating that. But above and beyond that, aphids love it. So do things like cabbage beetles and stuff. So if you have it growing near your cabbages, don't pull it out, leave it, because all the nasties will go directly for that plant and leave your cabbages and things alone.
If you purposefully grow weeds, then by definition they aren't weeds anymore, right? Of course, Danny does a lot of foraging also, and she has some tips.
People would think like you're going to go out foraging one time and it's like, okay, I'm good. No, not really. If you walk away knowing one or two plants that you actually remember this stuff, I have like 3 ring binders, like 3 of them that have just all the information I'm constantly collecting. It's a constant learning process. I got my phone, I got picture this, and I would make sure that wherever I was going, I left myself another 40 minutes or so to get there. And then I would just walk down the street and, oh, what's that? Click, oh, that's that. And I would do that for everything. I could go back and cross-reference it with books or check it with Google. and get as much information as I could. And it's that constant doing it. And it's a constant process. So
Apps like Picture This are great, but they can be inaccurate, so it's really important, especially if you're going to consume the plant you found, to cross-check with books and other sources.
I also say, like, know and go slow. So if you see something and you think you know what it is, make sure, don't put it in your mouth. They're the easy to find plants that you can identify. I also recommend everybody getting like a good book. The very first one that I started out was Maida Silverman's A City Herbal. She wrote it about New York City and things that you find in the cracks of the sidewalk. I think the original was published in 1977, but the book still holds up because there are still so many plants that you can find that are in that book that you'll find popping up, through the city.
Okay, so do your research. Second tip, consume them safely.
When you come home with stuff, proper cleaning, I will put like vinegar and baking soda and put them in to bathe before I use them. Unless you're going to use something like, in the case of elderflower, if you're making a cordial, you want something to be fizzy, then you need the natural yeast on plants. So in a case like that, I would say get them after the first rain so that you have them a little bit cleansed off because you don't want to overwash them when you get home.
If all this is sounding overwhelming, I suggest you take a look at Lady Danny's Instagram. She has so many videos of foraging experiments that show you don't have to know everything to get started.
It's really being open, just open to like all the information. And I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I think this whole process has taught me is just you cannot go in telling nature what you're going to get out of it. You just have to be open and then all of it pours out onto you. I think there's a lot of lore and legend and folktale that if I weave that into the stories that I tell, people will probably remember bits of the story and things about the plant based on that far longer than they will about me just spouting off like facts. It's those sorts of things that I try and weave in, because if you're dealing, people think that I'm doing it for kids. No, I do it for my own brain health too, because if you remember a story, you kind of remember the beginning, middle, and end, and the plants and what they were there for. So if you remember my story on the girl and why you should never say the name mugwort.
Long ago, in a village on the edge of an ancient forest, a kind-hearted girl collected herbs and flowers for her ailing grandmother. In the light of the silvery moon, she ventured deeper into the woods than she ever had before and stumbled into a glen filled with mugwort. Its silvery leaves shimmered like the moon, and its enchanting scent told of its protective and mystical powers. The girl began to gather it in handfuls, and an old woman emerged from the shadows of the forest. She warned the girl never to say the name mugwort aloud, for it would summon the spirits that guarded it. The girl promised to keep the secret and never said the name mugwort. And as years went by, she grew into the village's healer. One day, a stranger came to the village looking for healing, and not heeding the warning, shouted the name mugwort into the night. The spirits descended on the village. The girl knew what had to be done, and grabbing a handful of mugwort, spoke softly to the spirits, offering to exchange her life for the safety of her village. So moved, the spirits took her into the shadows, ensuring the village's protection for generations to come. And from that day forward, the villagers honored the little girl by never uttering mugwort and always respecting the power of the silvery moon.
The whole tie-in between the light of the silvery moon and mugwort being tied into having lunar capabilities and ties into sleep and dreaming, all those little bits and pieces, they're like little fragments that just go out there, but they're embedded in the story. And I think that helps people remember everything. It's more for me about preservation of knowledge and just getting it out there so people feel comfortable about it. This is stuff that people used to know all over. It wasn't a question of like me being the only one. Everybody knew this stuff. So I think especially for younger people that don't have grandparents here or, family members that can tell you how they used to use these things in the old days, me reminding you of that may be the thing that now you pass on to your child and it gets, the knowledge is preserved. There used to be an old Yiddish saying that what the son forgets, the grandson remembers. And I think that's kind of what has happened. A lot of times people got separated from their families. I mean, I originally from Wilmington. I came to Philly to go to Temple and I didn't leave. So a lot of people made farther distances than that. So they're not in touch with their family every day. Maybe they move countries. Maybe they don't have any access to their grandparents anymore. So that's part of it. I also think when the Great Migration of Blacks came from south to north, with coming into an urban situation, wanting to, really become more citified and to banish all these old country things. Nobody wants their grandmother's mustard plaster on your chest when you live in the city, because then you're a bumpkin. Instead, you want to go to Walgreens to get some slick mustard plaster that comes in a wrapper and, they charge you $10. And I think that became part of it too. And I think for an awful lot of people, chickens only came home to roost when they went to CVS during COVID and you saw empty shelves. And that's when all of a sudden, Grandma's mustard plaster would have been really useful right about now.
Working as an herbalist with a background in pharmaceutical publishing, Lady Danny has unique insight about the benefits of both and where they fall short. She spends a lot of time trying to marry what she learns from oral traditions with what has been scientifically researched about medicinal plants.
The problem with that is pharma is about money. Pharma is also about replication of something again and again and again to get this one exact formula. And you can't do that with forage plants because it's like wine. It changes every year. There's terroir, it's weather conditions, it's heat, it's all of these things. So unless they can find one constituent that they're willing to extrapolate out of it, that they think will make them money, they are not going to put money into a clinical trial to find out whether this is really true. So all you have is empirical evidence about it.
Just because formal science hasn't figured out the value of medicinal plants yet, doesn't mean it's not there. So learning the oral histories of the people that have been using these medicines for generations, in fact, is probably the most invaluable resource we have.
It's a constant balance of information, and then there's always the issue of trying to chronicle where every piece of information I've gotten comes from. And that's probably one of the reasons it stopped me from putting together a book, because it would be like, I don't even know how you do a bibliography for stuff that you had conversations with people about. It's like, how does that work? So I think it's really important. And if you take the time to understand the benefits of a plant, you also understand more about people. You probably want to deal with people less, but you definitely understand that some things that it's easy to write off, but if you give them a little time and attention, they will come back stronger. It shows you that things that, weeds that people said, oh, that's absolutely of no value. Those are really beneficial, old-timey, old-fashioned things that people have just bits of wisdom people discarded, but they're there for the taking. You just have to make time to learn. I just feel fortunate that I'm in this space right now, and I would do what I do because this is where I am at this point in life. I know some people want to do it because they I always laugh and say yeah, I went into foraging for the fame and fortune. It's not. But I love what I'm doing so much. And this was not my comfort level of going out and teaching people or anything else. But like I said, sometimes you get called to do something, and sometimes God throws a pebble. And I'm just happy that I didn't get hit by a boulder before I realized that maybe this is something that I should be doing. And is it easy? No, I always get butterflies in my stomach before I go out. I try and do everything to the best of my ability, even when it's out of my comfort zone. And I just hope that if nothing else, and people just see that you can be that full-fledged weirdo that everybody told you shouldn't be, and you should rein it in a little bit. I'm not reining it in anymore. I mean, how much life have I got left? So it's I might as well be full-on crazy plant lady. I'm cool with that.
That was Lady Danny of the Landed Gentris. If you want to find out more about foraging, herbalism, and even go meet the lady herself, check out her website, landedgentress.com, or find her on Instagram and TikTok. If you feel like foraging has become super popular these days, you aren't wrong. It is having a resurgence, partially thanks to folks on social media like Lady Danny that are putting wild foods in the spotlight. Some of that is driven by a desire to reconnect with nature. Some of it was out of necessity around supply issues during COVID. But the truth is that foraging has always been around, despite forces at work trying to bury it. Colonialism is a big one. Part of taking over land involved taking over the environment. Plants from the homeland were introduced and everything else was deemed a weed. Have you ever wondered why so many of our native plants are named weeds? Milkweed, pokeweed, Joe Pye weed, the list goes on. Of course, a big reason to introduce plants that you knew about was being able to grow food, but it was also used to control the people already living there. By imposing European methods of farming and stigmatizing foraging as an inferior or primitive way of getting food, the colonialists started to control how people could eat. Farmland began to take over foraging land. And even places that were protected and remained wild and filled with food became off limits. People who had for generations found their food in these newly created state and federal parks were now barred from collecting any plants. Restricting access to wild plants, or weeds as they had become known, created a dependency on colonialists for food and resources. Of course, the force of colonialism goes hand in hand with racism, and this extended to Black Americans. Enslaved people would forage to supplement the plantation food. And after the Civil War, freed Black people would sell their foraged food as a source of income until the United States government passed racist laws making foraging illegal. And then we have good old capitalism. Big agriculture can't make a profit if people can find food for free. Also, finding your own food takes time, and in a system where you need money to survive and to earn that money you have to work all the time, cheap food produced by industrially grown monocultures wins out. You just don't have time to seek out your food in the woods. There is so much to say about the state of our gardens and our food systems and how they've been shaped by our nation's history. But for now, let's just take some time to consider who gets to decide, is this a weed? And instead, maybe ask some of the bigger questions. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey into the weeds, and a very warm special thanks to Lady Danny. Seriously, if you haven't found her online yet, please do. I've helped you out in the show notes. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please like, review, and share it. We only have a few more episodes this season, and I'd love to hear what you love, what you could leave behind, and what you want to learn more about. You can email me that and your garden questions at grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you want more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.